Let's turn now to the vice presidential debate, where we have some polling in now about who won, who lost, who was more favorable, who did better on the issues. Let's put this up there on the screen from CBS News. I talked a little bit about this in our post show, but it does show that partisanship is alive and well in America. Who won the vice presidential debate? 42% J.D. Vance, 41% Tim Walz, 17% said it was a tie. If we continue along the issues, what do we see? Who did a better job talking about abortion? So 62% of viewers said Walz did, compared to J.D. Vance at 38%. You will note that's roughly where abortion favorability ratings and support for pro-life or pro-choice is. Healthcare, 59% for Walz, and for Vance, 59% versus 41. Conflict in the Middle East was a 50-50. Economy was 49-51, with Vance taking the edge. And then immigration was 48-52. So not a lot of surprise in terms of where they are, and they break down to very much along partisan lines. Let's go to the next one here. Favorable opinion of candidates. So before the debate, Tim Walz was at 52. After the debate, he was at 60. Before the debate, J.D. Vance was at 40. After the debate, he was at 49. So actually a rough equivalent increase in the favorability of both of those candidates. Of course, Tim Walz experiencing the 60%. And then finally, something that I talked a little bit about last time, let's put the next one up there, is just about who won the debate when you compare it to the past. So this was actually CNN's snapshot. It had Walz at 49 and Vance at 51. But if you compare the Vance, Vance performance compared to past Republicans, it's actually pretty significant. 59% said Kamala Harris beat Mike Pence. 42% said Kaine beat, or roughly it was 48% Pence, then 42% there for Tim Kaine. For Biden-Ryan, it was 48-44 with Ryan, and then Biden-Palin was 51-36. So Sarah Palin, of course, taking the last. But JD does nudge out 51 and 49, so the best performance there within the last, last 14, 15 years, something like that. So yeah, roughly, oh, I forgot, we didn't include this, but there was a poll. It was like, will this impact your vote? And only 1% said yes. So as we always try and tell you here, the VP debates, unfortunately, they just don't make a big impact here in the country.
There's something interesting here. I mean, first of all, I think people, it was 50-50, not just in this poll, but a lot of other polls. I think people were kind of like impressed with JD. He came off a lot better than he's come off in, you know, other instances on the campaign trail where he's just been consistently in attack dog mode. But I think they also found Tim Walz to be just like nice and relatable. You know, even his being nervous at the beginning is like, if he's not just putting on the character of the aw shucks, what am I doing here? Like, if you really are that person, you would be nervous at the beginning. So I think people just, there was a weird thing, Saagar, where I think the normie reaction was like, oh, this is so much more normal and respectful than the Trump-Harris debate, and why can't we have this type of politics? But then on the other hand, when you look at the polling of how Trump's polling, versus how every just sort of like standard issue, more normal Republican is polling in the Senate races, he's doing better than they are. So it's like, you know, people profess that they would rather have this more sort of like normal, more boring exchange, but then what they actually vote for and find appealing, like on some level, they also want the show. So there's some internal contradictions going on there, I think.
That is a very astute and correct observation. I actually said that. I was like, you know, watching that, somebody like me, I'm educated, I, you know, come from an upper middle class family. I look at that, I'm like, wow, that actually seems very attractive. You got somebody who's like decently high IQ, who can articulate a position that these people allegedly want. You have Tim Walz, seems like a nice enough guy. I don't see anything particularly wrong with that. But then you ask Republican voters what they love most about Trump, and it's the circus. Like, let's all just be honest about what's happening here and about what is most animating for not even Republican voters, but for the vast majority of the people who do vote for him. If you look at the amount of turnout that Trump has been able to drive in American politics, it is historical. I mean, especially compared to George W. Bush, to any so-called normal politician. So I think this is a classic example of people who allegedly say that they want one thing, but it's kind of like social media. If you tell everybody like, oh, my social media algorithm, I don't seek out rage content, that's for other people. It's like, well, you do. Statistically, you do. And statistically, it's what gets you to perform or to spend more time on the platform. So your actions are much better predictors. And I think that, look, I don't think it's a good thing, per se, but it is clear, like, I think it's a reflection of what people actually want. And their voting behavior shows us this quite clearly. Trump is polarizing in a sense where people who hate him love coming out to vote, and people who love him also love to come out to vote. And that's why 2020 was one of the highest voter turnouts in modern American history. So I think the truth is that everybody who professes wanting to return to this, there was another thing I also saw, which is some teenagers who came of age during Trump. This is purely anecdotal, but I saw some analysis floating around there. They're like, "Oh, mom, dad, that was so boring." And yeah, it was boring, in a traditional sense. I guess the Rorschach test is like, what do you prefer? Do you want a boring politics or not? There's pluses and minuses, I think, to both sides. But it does tell me about Trump's power. And you can see that in all of the neck-to-neck polling. For all of his downsides, he is just the most singular candidate in modern history. And he's changed everything about the way that we look at the presidency.
I mean, in some ways, this is like Trump's central insight, is that even though people may say, like, oh, I liked the J.D. Vance, like the respectful tone of the debate, and I want the decorum and whatever, they also can't resist the show. And I don't put myself above this either.
No,
like,
everyone's the same.
Was it more fun to talk about the, like, insane cats and dogs debate? Did I have more to say about that? Did we, did we have more energy around that and probably do a lot more blogs on it? Yeah, we did, because it was more interesting. Even though, obviously, the content of the policy ideas that were articulated by Walz and J.D. Vance are important, although, they're the vice president, so how important are they? Also, in the greater, that plays into it as well. But Trump has this view of the world that all attention is good attention. All controversy is good. Like, no publicity is bad publicity. That's his view of the world. Now, I think sometimes he takes that too far. Like, for example, the Haitian pets thing he thought was good for him. It was not good for him, right? There are ways you can go too far with that. But that was kind of his central insight into American politics, is that, no, you people profess that you want the decorum, you want the norms, you want the, niceties and the civil discourse, but you don't. You don't. You want the messy show, and that's what I'm going to give you. And, that's been one of the kind of defining characteristics of the Trump era. And to your point about the teenagers, for young people today, that's all they know of American politics, is it just being this messy, outrageous reality show. And it's the bar also becomes higher and higher for what is even going to grab people's attention and have that shock value, because we're also becoming so inured to constant shock value in our politics that things don't rate in the same way. But I just go back to, I don't know that Trump will win this election. He's certainly in a position to have a shot to do it. I do think he's probably a little bit behind right now in terms of the battleground states, but it's very difficult to say because it's so ultimately close. But if you look at the Republican Senate candidates, they are all underperforming Donald Trump. All of them, across the board, as far as I know. So what does that tell you about what people really want in our politics? And, although they may profess to appreciate that sort of more dignified debate, when it comes down to it, there's a lot of people out there who are interested in the show and gravitate towards the show and like the aggressiveness of it and the nastiness of it and all of that.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it's an elite thing. I genuinely do. It's that in the modern 2000s, the 1990s, elite gatekeepers had much more control on who was able to make it into politics than not. It was a much less democratic system. In the modern media environment, most people can vote not only with their eyeballs, but literally with their ability to engage in the process. And then with the internet, they chose Donald Trump, really, who was the first truly modern candidate in this sense. And that is why he is outperforming everybody. He even has a higher favorability than JD. I mean, to me, that's nuts. That's actually crazy that you can look at that and be like, you know what? Between these two individuals, Trump is the one that should be president. But I'm not dumb. I know. That's the base circus instinct. It's a tame tale as old as time. You go back and you read about Rome and about what got the mob all jazzed up and why they wanted to who they eventually just started to back. And I think it does tell you something. At the same time, you know, the caution is that circus and all of that does ignite such passion in an equal number of the electorate that you do risk actually defeat at the ballot box. And so for this, you know, we talked about that election moment. The Kamala Harris campaign immediately ended up cutting an ad about the JD answer on whether Trump won the election. C5, let's take a listen.
It's really rich for Democratic leaders to say that Donald Trump is a unique threat to democracy when he peacefully gave over power.
He is still saying he didn't lose the election. I would just ask that. Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future.
That is a damning non-answer. America, I think you've got a really clear choice of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
So look, I mean, we knew at the moment that was going to be turned into it, and that's exactly what's happening. We see it all around. We see it all in the battleground states. If you look at the midterm elections, that was a major issue why Republicans underperformed. And I do think it remains a risk for Trump, especially because a lot of these constituencies who he's gaining with, like younger Latino or Black men, here's the truth. They don't vote statistically as much as seniors and upper middle class whites. Those people vote in droves. Now, I'm not saying that they won't vote. It's just a lot riskier to pace your electoral ambitions amongst non-voters or infrequent voters. You would always want to bank people who are like very civically engaged. And that is a message very geared towards them, the type of folks who will order their mail-in ballot, or the type of people we covered in Northern Virginia who will line up for a mile on day one of early voting just to make sure that they can bank their vote. So that's the risk. We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that was the moment that will be most remembered from this debate. Do I think it'll be electorally consequential? Not really, because I do feel like people feel about Donald Trump however they feel at this point. You know, being reminded of Stop the Steal, being reminded of January 6th isn't gonna change any minds at this point. The people who are out there who are still undecided, I think, are more likely to be deciding on economic issues, bread and butter issues, potentially whether we're getting dragged into a war in the Middle East, you know, those sorts of things. If the port strike ends up impacting the economy, some other unforeseen thing that happens between now and Election Day, I doubt that at this point that really moves the needle. To me, it's more of a warning sign for if this election is close, I don't think there's any doubt that Trump is going to try to pull the same thing again. And, you know, JD Vance was put on this ticket with the assumption that he would stick with Donald Trump through all of those, you know, election lies in a way that Mike Pence ultimately at the end of the day didn't. And so this was, I think, indication number one that he may, right? When he's up there on the debate stage and he's faced directly with the question, did he win? He can't say. He knows what Donald Trump wants him to do, and he's gonna stick with that through thick or thin. And, you know, for JD and his future career and whatever it is, like, probably the determination of that is not gonna be made in this campaign. It's gonna be made if Trump loses and goes down the same direction, which if he loses, he will go down the same direction, how he handles that moment. Because obviously it's the no-win situation. You either end up with Mike Pence land, where the Republican base hates you and wants you literally dead, or, you know, you're all in with the greatest insanity you can possibly imagine, and then you can kiss any sort of like mainstream respectability goodbye. And the truth of the matter is that while Trump can get away with those sorts of things, no other politician has shown an ability to. So it's a very, you know, if they win, then he'll, you know, that's a different scenario, and that's very possible, right? If they lose, I don't think there's any ultimate winning for J.D. Vance out of this.
Politics is about gambles. The gamble was that Biden was president. They were easily going to cream him, and it would be an easy cruise to the nomination, I guess, in 2028. In this case, yeah, if he loses, I've always said, I think it's a problem just because you have to endorse Stop the Steal, which will really put off no matter, especially if we do it twice. I mean, can you imagine the exhaustion?
Oh,
of a lot
people
of
will be thoroughly
People will be
disgusted.
pissed.
Yeah.
And if they were pissed
Trump's an
once,
old man. Like, this
yeah.
show doesn't go on forever.
And Trump will be around, though, no matter what, until the day he dies. And so he will basically, he will demand, if he doesn't run again, that at the very least, whoever his successor is has to pick up that mantle. The question will be the ability of people pull away from it. I don't think that will exist. I think the Republican electorate will stick with him. If he does win, though, then, of course, this debate performance and others was good for him, especially inside of the campaign. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.